Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report, Wednesday's edition, broadcasting from beautiful Irvine, California. Happy to have you with us today. Hey folks, we have a fascinating show on the horizon today. Where you're going to hear some great stories about some things going on campus. We're going to dive into the economics of the day and talk about information about the variant, politics, the Build Back Better bill, etc. But I got to tell you, I want to welcome a fascinating guest. Scott Shay, welcome to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you with us today.
Mark, it's a pleasure to be here from coast to coast.
Coast to coast, New York to Cali, and flyover country, all the best. Hey, Scott, you authored a book, and it's a fascinating read. Conspiracy U, a case study. You're also the founder and chairman of Signature Bank. So brief our audience here. Let's talk about this book because the title's fascinating and it really plays into a lot of stuff going on in society, culture, on campus today.
No question about it. And here's the thing, what happens on campus doesn't stay on campus. It spreads and to some degree infects the rest of society if it's not a good thing. I was stunned when I dived into what some professors at universities are calling scholarship when it's really conspiracy theories. And here's the thing about conspiracy theories, which is different and people don't usually get. A conspiracy theory is the opposite of scholarship because the idea of scholarship is you create a theory, then you spend all your time throwing facts at it. And if the theory stands, it lives one more day until people can throw more facts at it. The idea is it's evidence-based. Conspiracy theories that are mushrooming on campus are theories that whenever there's a bad fact, it expands. So let me give you an example. There's a professor at Northwestern University, tenured professor of electrical engineering, who wrote a book called The Hoax of the 20th Century. Now, the Holocaust is sadly a fact.
It is.
And a fact. And there are thousands of documents across Europe that show gas being, the concentration camps being built, the Wannsee Conference in 1942, where the final solution was actually detailed. There are Nazis who confess to being perpetrators, confess to being guards, confess to being witnesses. These are all facts. So what does Professor Butts do? He says that the Jews were so devious that they planted these thousands of documents across Europe. And they actually he uses the word hoodwink and he uses the word bamboozled. Pure, innocent Nazis who were just hapless to confess to crimes against humanity that they had nothing to do with. They were off, singing in the church choir at the time. Unbelievable. This could not be something that would be taken seriously, one would think. Yet this person has retained tenure for a long time. And it's not only on the far right, but I show it's on the far left.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because normally the far right is the one that's always accused of the conspiracy theories. But let me ask you this. How does a guy like this, with an obvious anti-Semitic background, how does the Board of Regents of this university put up with garbage like this? Because not only the evidence that you talked about, we've got documentaries, we've got films that came out of World War II that were used at the Nuremberg trials that documented all this stuff. Scott, how in the world does that guy maintain his tenure?
Well, part of the way he maintains his tenure, and he argues in the book that he's not really an anti-Semite. He's just an anti-Zionist. And this has become the new cloak word for hating Jews. But I got to tell you, I'm just going to read you a couple of lines from the far left. So there's a guy by the name of Stephen Saleta, who was a professor at the University of Illinois. And he's a doyen of the far left. Mm-hmm. And so popular, it's hard to book him. And he wrote almost the same thing Butts wrote. And I'm going to just read it because it's so unbelievable. He says, the Nazi Holocaust in Europe seems a direct antecedent to Israel's founding. There were plans from the outset of Zionism to rid the promised land of its indigenous population. The problem with the remembrance of the Nazi Holocaust is that it happens in isolation from relevant historical events, and worse, from its ongoing consequences, including the genocide taking place now is with the Palestinians at the hand of Israel. So the way people get away with this is to say, with blatant lies that are published, that's from a book, by the way, that was published by Duke University Press.
Unbelievable.
Nobody's paying any attention to this stuff. But they get away with these lies by claiming, no, we're not anti-Semites, we're just anti-Zionist. But they're literally making stuff up. And I've got quotes. The thing that I wanted to do, and I've spent, as you know, you mentioned I'm founder of Signature Bank. I have a busy full-time day job.
Yeah, you do.
But I really, and sometimes it takes many times my evenings too. But for 20 months, I took all my discretionary free time, just researching what these people are saying, because I don't have to make anything up. I'm just quoting them.
Let me ask you a question. What motivated you, or when the light went off in your head, hey, I got to get involved in this and expose some of this stuff? What was the trigger that enlightened you, who, you're chairman of a bank, you got a full-time job, and yet you devoted time to this? What was the trigger that caused you to, hey, this has to be exposed?
So my father was a Holocaust survivor. He was liberated 75. I started writing an article when he was, to commemorate the 75th anniversary of his liberation from Dachau, where he was less than 70 pounds when he was liberated. I mean, he was one, you mentioned the movies, he was one of those walking, as he would say, bag of bones.
Right.
And it took him a year to recover. And thank God he was liberated by the Americans. So they put him in a field hospital, and thank God. But it didn't start then. The thing that happened was, and he knew it, my father, was he grew up in Schaftlein, Lithuania. And when the Nazis came, the local population had already been conditioned with conspiracy theories. There was a blood libel about a boy who ended up turning up that they claimed the Jews had killed. Jewish shops had little smears of black tar put on their signs so that people would know not to shop there if they know that a Jew owned that shop. So if they hated Jews, don't shop there. So when the Nazis came in, all of the locals turned over every last Jew in Schaftlein. And so I really felt like this was something I had to do. And because I, wasn't going on my bicycle, there's a lot of things I didn't do for 20 months in order to write this book. But on the other hand, I'm so worried that once I dived into the rabbit hole of reading what these professors are writing, and they're getting tenure and they're getting awards. Jasper Puar wrote a blood libel that basically says Jews are harming Palestinians to mine their organs, making it up.
Yeah,
that they're starving
totally.
Palestinians, just making it up. And she even at one point admits it. She said in a speech, I'm turning the speculative into the now, so I get more people involved and supporting the violent takeover of the river to the sea. They even admit it.
Right.
But they're creating conspiracy theories, and susceptible people are buying into this. And that's what was a mind blower for me.
Well, part of that, all this radicalism on these college campuses comes from some of this stuff. I mean, it's not just the anti-Semitism being taught by some of these professors that you're talking about, but it's everything from critical race theory to the values of socialism. I mean, we talked yesterday a little bit about what happened when Kyle Rittenhouse, when there was 3 student organizations at Arizona State. I may butcher the names of them, but a group for Students for Socialism, multicultural safe spaces, and then Students for Palestine. I know I've butchered the names, but basically left-wing organizations coming out saying, no, we don't want Rittenhouse in this school. And it took college Republicans to stand up and say, no, we do. I don't know how that's going to turn out. But again, that's just anecdotal about what you're talking about here, about some of these things going on campus, because That culture war was on the verge, I think, of being lost until we saw what happened in that Virginia election.
Well, look, I think you said a lot, and there's a lot to unpack.
Yes, I did.
I would say
Take your
this.
time and unpack it, please.
I would say this. First of all, even the progressive left has actually even perverted critical race theory, because I go into what it was a little bit in the book because I want to explain what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, the thing that I like about critical race theory is it's got a lot of racism in it. I mean, from being colorblind, it's hyper color conscious.
Exactly.
And interestingly, what some of the critical race theorists say, just going back to the Jews, this is much bigger than the Jews, but because what you said goes right to it. The critical race theorists say that Jews are hyper white, that they are conspiring with police departments around the world to oppress people of color. Now that's obviously wrong and it's without facts. But what I found interesting is that on the far right, the intellectual neo-Nazis who claim to be just in search of truth are saying that the Jews are fake whites. They're using their fake white faces to infiltrate and to displace and replace, which is what they said in Charlotte, replace white people. And so Jews are joining with people of color around the world to be an infiltrator and to oppress all people of whiteness. So on the one hand, on the far right, they claim Jews are oppressing rights. On the far left, they claim the Jews are oppressing all people of color. And when you again read what they say, it's the same thing. So you might have something in critical race theory that's written with that underpinning that sounds, whoa, I'm reading something on the far right that's just as race conscious. And again, I was just surprised at the commonality of outrageous statements on both extremes that somehow are almost identical. I showed you the butts in the Saleta comments. I mean, they're saying different words, the same thing. So I'm really worried about that. What I'm worried about is that when students graduate from college, that they are indoctrinated into not understanding the difference between theories that are fact-based, evidence-based, and a willingness to just throw away a theory if it doesn't work, versus conspiracy theories. So in the course of this research, one thing that I found was that 11% of millennials and below, so people up to 40 and below, adults 21 to 40, let me put it that way.
Largest section of our population now, right?
Definitely. Well, I don't know if they're by themselves, but they're certainly growing, and they're the most influential, 21 to 40. And 11% believe the Jews caused the Holocaust. 15% agree with Saleta and Butts that the Holocaust was either a myth or largely exaggerated or something else. Now, these are people going through college.
Right.
And that's unacceptable. I mean, that's saying that people, I show one other study that shows, which is the opposite of whatever happened, what the history was, but the more education you have, the more anti-Semitic you tend to be.
Oh my goodness, I had no concept that was the case.
I was blown away. I mean, I cited in the book, and I went through the study itself very carefully, but it's not about Israel. It's about, if you take their study, the study was very carefully organized, where on the one hand it said, should the military permit Jews to wear yarmulkes, something on their head, and the second question, Sikhs to wear turbans. Should Seventh-day Adventists be given special accommodation to take off Saturday? Should Jews who are Sabbath observers? If you graduated from college, you were 5 percentage points, which is a lot, more likely to say that the Jew shouldn't have the benefit that the non-Jew should have. And if you had a graduate degree, you were 15 percentage points more likely to give the anti-Semitic response, which is, again,
astounding.
Astounding.
Yeah. Scott, do you think that's part of, to tie these together here? You know, I believe in your figures. Jews represent 2.5% of the population in the United States, and yet a super high amount, was it maybe 40% of hate crimes against that 2.5% population group? Are my figures pretty close there?
So they're directionally correct. It's about 2.5% Jews in the United States, percentage of the population, of crimes, hate crimes committed because of religion.
Right.
60% were committed against Jews in the last, and it's pretty steady. It's 58, 60% were committed against Jews. For racial crimes, blacks, clearly it's the biggest number. But for religion, unfortunately, there's 2 blocks from where I'm sitting. There was in May, a person who was wearing a kippah was attacked on the street and had to was sent to the hospital. You had anti-Semitic attacks in Skokie, in LA. You probably read about it. People sitting out having dinner.
Yep, sure did.
And
it was all over the news.
So it is, and I have to tell you, for the first time I almost couldn't believe it was happening. I was walking down the street on the Upper East Side. I actually was on my way to services because it was the anniversary of one of my parents passing, and it's a tradition to go and say Kaddish, to say memorial prayer. I put my kippah on when I walked out the door. I didn't think about it. I'm on my way to synagogue, and someone starts shouting at me. I almost couldn't believe it was happening. You know, it was one of those things where, is this really happening? The guy followed me for a block, and finally I had enough and I started shouting back at him, and he walked away. But I couldn't believe it at first. Self-preservation.
You experienced it, the intimidation, absolutely.
Unbelievable. It wasn't physical. I don't want to claim that he attacked me, but
it doesn't have to be physical. But
he was walking on the street.
Yeah, he was clearly trying to intimidate you. I mean, we're seeing that all over the country, not just against Jews, but against a lot of ordinary Americans, particularly coming from the left. But I know not to distinguish that, because in the case of what you're talking about, the conspiracy, it's happening on both the right and the left, and you cite good examples on both. So I don't want to politicize it, because what Scott's talking about here, it's not a leftist and it's not a right. It is happening on both the far left and the far right, and that's unfortunate because, Scott, as we talk about, 75% of the American public either center left or center right. Things work pretty good for the center group, but boy, when you get out on those fringes, it's the wild, wild west, however you want to call it, and it's unacceptable that this situation is happening here in the United States. It's not just in the U.S., it's happening all across the globe.
It is a worldwide phenomenon. And it's very interesting because I did the review of the literature. People have gone through every conspiracy theory, from the Denver airport conspiracy theory, QAnon, going back to the Illuminati. What's funny is that the majority of conspiracy theories, the overwhelming majority of conspiracy theories, seem to have Jews involved one way or another. But what's critical is they're all unfalsifiable, and they're growing. I mean, the Sandy Hook conspiracy theory, Alex Jones saying that no one was killed.
It's insane.
It was all actors.
Yeah.
And again, unbelievable. But what is problematic is that people going through college are starting to believe this stuff because they're not being taught. That's why I'm so worried about what's going on in campus, and I'm trying to get this out there, because if we lose campus, if we lose the university, I don't mind disagreeing with someone.
Right.
But if they assume that any fact that I say has to be part of a cover-up, a forgery, then we're going to just be two warring camps.
Yeah, what's the old political saying? You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
And campus should be the last place that happens. You can disagree with someone, but you shouldn't be A, disagreeable, B, the other thing that I show in Conspiracy U is that intimidation, you touched on it earlier, is used a lot on campus. Most, and this is not, there's a poll that came out subsequent to my book. Most people on campus have suppressed expressing their own opinion. And in some classes, you can't disagree with the opinion of the professor. I had a professor, I talk about one in the book, who I didn't necessarily agree with, but she totally respected that people had other opinions. And as long as they were fact-based, you could write an opinion, you could write an essay that was the exact opposite of what she believed. You could still get an A. Today, you would be flunked.
Oh, I can confirm that, Scott. Earlier this year, I can't remember, it was probably Q2, we had a guest on Schaftlein Report who actually did not want to show their face because they were senior in college, they were conservative at a liberal university in the Northeast. We had to disguise obviously couldn't show the face, had to disguise the voice. And the basic point was, if I disagree with these liberal professors and state a conservative opinion, they'll flunk me. Yeah. I mean, think about that. Guy's a senior and, on the verge of graduating. And if he had expressed an opinion different than what the professor was, the professor had that power on an editorial type basis to downgrade the guy or actually flunk him out of a class.
Well, that's the problem, is that these theories, and critical race theory it was really turbocharged by this guy, Herbert Marcuse, who wrote a incredibly influential essay called Repressive Tolerance. And what he viewed is that, which is turning truth on its tail, which is, he said that if you don't share the values of whoever this intelligentsia is, then you need to be repressed. And that's really tolerance. It's also part of this perversion of language, which I found tremendously in here. By the way, some of the people who are writing these books, who are professors, it's actually unintelligible. And in one or two cases I quote from them. These are books that have won awards by major groups such as the Women's Studies Association and others. Absolutely unintelligible. Not only don't they have theory, but they can't write English.
Let me ask you, Scott, why have these people not been called out for some of this, the blatant falsehoods, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Zionism? I mean, just the perversion of facts. I mean, I always refer to the media as the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. They promote a lot of this garbage, but no one seems to call them out other than someone such as yourself who's done the research on this.
Well, here's the thing. The faculty control the campus. It's not even the administration. And I talk about in the book, I approached several trustees, and several approached me during one incident from Northwestern University. Mm-hmm. And I found that by and large, people who are appointed trustees at universities are doing so for the honorific of it. They don't recognize that they're supposed to be the adults in the room. So the administration comes up and does a lot of nice PowerPoints and the like, but they don't realize that the faculty make all the appointment decisions. They control everything from the students, because the power dynamic is, as you said, they can flunk students. They decide who are going to be graduate students. They decide what courses are going to be taught. So they can teach a course that says, Israel is the worst thing in the world, or anything is the worst thing in the world. And everybody's going to have to take notes, and it could be a required class. And so the people who are the adults in the room are totally absent. We don't have knighthoods here. So the best you can do is becoming a trustee of a university. And that seems to be what people like to do. And one of the things I do is call out the trustees who are supposed to be the watching over this and have abdicated. So I talk in the end of the book about what can be done, and it's very problematic. It's very problematic. I don't know if you know, there's an attempt right now to start a new university where there will be liberals and conservatives, which is a remarkable that you have to say that, you know, you need to have a university to have both. And that's at the University of Austin.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Absolutely.
So I think there's some interesting personalities who are getting involved in that. I think it's going to be a lot of work, but it's because the faculties are so embedded, and they're going to be there for decades, and they decide who gets tenure and who gets everything. It is going to be very, very hard. And I think what I tried to do in the book, look, I've had a lot of people tell me they've sent this to their students, at their children who are students, because their students, as they're from going to freshman to sophomore year, are starting to think in all of these systemic theories that are gobbledygook, and not coming out any smarter than when they went in, and not understanding fundamentally how to understand fact from made up theory.
Yep. And a lot of them come out $50,000 to $100,000 or more in debt, and they're saying, "Oh my God, what the hell did I just do spending 3 or 4 years doing here?" And then they get out in the real world, and there's all these other forces hitting them. There's no safe spaces in the real world, Scott, as you're well aware, and a lot of them get lost. I mean, yeah, and that's part of the problem we're having in these universities right now. Scott, you've got the book with you. Why don't you put it up to the camera so we can take a look at it here? There you go, folks. Conspiracy U, a case study. Boy, for all you avid readers out there, you're going to love this one. This is some hard-hitting stuff in here, and you hear about all the stuff going on campuses. You know, Scott, you've got some great insight in this. I want to shift subject a little bit now. You're a businessman. You actually co-founded a bank. It grew from 0 to $100 billion in assets. Give us your perspective right now about what's going on in the U.S. economy, good, bad, and ugly. And, we've got this monstrosity of a bill before the United States Senate right now. They've got, amnesty for 6.5 million people within this bill. There's a lot of things in it. But, give us your perspective. Times are challenging right now. We've got a new COVID variant. The first case just appeared in California today. Travel bans to 8 South African countries. Give us your perspective as chairman of a large financial institution.
Well, we do have a complicated time right now. And just where we are, I mean, I think the thing that's critical to keep in mind is inflation is a serious problem.
Yes, it is.
And I'm glad that the transitory word has been relegated to the garbage can. By whatever measure you're following, inflation is between 4% and 6%.
Yes.
And the supply chain problems are not going away. It took a lot of mismanagement to get us here, and it's not going to be mismanagement by the government largely, but also by corporate America, and also the times, which is people have shifted from spending on services to things, to tangible things. So people are no longer buying Kindle books, they're actually buying hardcover books and the like. They're buying things you can touch. So we're at a change point here in the economy, in which we have inflation. We didn't have inflation before, but now we've got it. And the question is, what do you do then? Well, I actually think the Fed is not going to be that effective at managing this sort of thing.
I concur.
Because they can do whatever monetary policy they can. They can't open up more ports on the West Coast. They can't open up Savannah, Georgia's port to handle any more than it is now. So the first thing they should do is no harm. And that probably means a faster taper.
Hopefully so.
And I think in terms of fiscal policy, it probably should be, as Senator Manchin said a while ago, to consider a pause, because we got a lot of additional fiscal stimulus that may not have been entirely necessary in the last bill. I mean, the states, which were worried that they were going to have shortfalls, are all flush with cash.
Amazingly flush.
Which is amazing. And there was so much money in the, and I'm not against the rental stabilization program. I think there were some people who were hard hit by COVID, but there was so much money in it and it was so unmanaged and mismanaged that there's tons of money. There's many billions of dollars sitting unspent. So now to spend a lot more money is questionable at a time that you've got really raging inflation. I think that we're probably going to see rates suppressed for a while. So it's normally not a case where you'd have a 1.5% 10-year treasury
Right.
and 5 or 6% inflation.
That doesn't work long term.
It doesn't work long.
It can't sustain itself there.
Well, here's the reason why it wouldn't sustain itself, but with the Fed, it might for a while, which is the easiest way to lower the debt that we have. And the most insidious and in a way it's a tax is to have inflation exceed the real rates of interest for a while.
That's exactly
and
right.
Indeed, historically, that has happened for periods of time. I mean, it clearly happened in the 70s for most of the decade.
Yes, it
and
did.
that ended up reducing essentially and inflated away the debt. It monetized the debt.
Right.
You could have that happen again. That's a strange world. And when I was talking about we're entering a strange world, but that could happen where we have negative real rates of interest for a long time. So clearly Omicron, and I'm sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but Omicron variant is a big question mark.
Right.
Anybody who tells you they know for sure is lying.
Right. They don't.
They don't know. Hopefully it'll be mild. That's my hope. I mean, that's my hope and prayer, by the way, too.
Sure.
There's some evidence that it might be mild, but until we know, it's problematic. And if we end up being, the economy ends up being sort of it won't be locked down again, but if it ends up being stressed to some degree, that too will be more inflationary. So if you have the Build Back Better bill passing as it stands with these other substantial inflationary
pressures.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
You've got a recipe for a problem.
You know, Chairman Powell spoke to the Senate yesterday, and he's testifying before the House today, and it's really interesting. I watched Powell testify, and we've been saying it on this show for months that the Fed has got to stop this insidious $120 billion a month bond buying. They whittled it down $15 billion in November to 105. In December, it's going to be 90. Now at the December Fed meeting, they're talking about maybe stopping it a lot sooner than they'd initially planned, where they were going to extend it all the way out to May. So it seems like we've got Powell on one hand, who's just been reappointed, recognizing that he made a mistake by calling inflation transitory. And like you said, they took that, the transitory word and put it on the ash heap of history. It amazes me, Scott, how all the PhDs at the Fed, seeing this right before their eyes, could miss it so bad. And yet, while you have that going on with the Fed, you've got Janet Yellen here, the former Treasury Secretary, the current Treasury Secretary, former chairman of the Fed, advocating for this Build Back Better bill. And I know she's part of the Biden administration, but Scott, like you said, and Manchin's recognized this, we spent $1.9 trillion in January when that first piece passed. We just passed a $1.2 trillion bill. That's going to be spread over 6 to 8 years. This country, with $29 trillion in debt, Scott, it's inconceivable to me we could be lumping another $1.75 trillion on top of it.
Well, it's actually even more than that, because there's so much smoke, it's hard to see the mirrors.
I'm being kind.
In terms of entitlements put in for 1 or 2 years that actually will be for much longer.
Right.
They can't be repealed, because once you give an entitlement, it's really hard to take it away.
Yep.
And so it's worrisome. I think the infrastructure bill, if I had to do it myself, I would have made some additions. I would have made some subtractions, but I do think we needed an infrastructure bill.
Agreed.
I think this bill is a very ambitious bill, and I'm hoping that there's a pause and people look at it, because I think a few months more of inflation data, and that's one of the reasons why the administration's trying to push this quickly, because a few months more inflation data may make moderate Democrats reconsider their support.
Well, think about this, Scott. I mean, we've got two basically that are holding it up, if you will, Manchin and Sinema. Thank God we have them. But again, your senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, he is pushing this, try to get this thing done before the end of the year. You know, the Senate's got a lot on its plate coming up. Manchin is basically advocating a pause. There's a lot of things in that bill he doesn't like the paid family leave, some of the energy policies in it. You know, the Senate Parliamentarian still has to rule on this immigration piece that shouldn't be part of a budget reconciliation bill. From my perspective, I hope the parliamentarian does her job and, you know, rules accordingly, as she has twice in the past. And I hope, for the good of this country, that Manchin sticks to his guns and, you know, let's see how this plays itself out, because I agree with you 100%. If we see inflation still running 6% heading into Q1 of 2022, Scott, it is going to be a bloodbath for the Democrats at the polls in 2022, because, as you said earlier, inflation is a hideous tax on those least able to deal with it, which is the poor and the middle class. And out here in California, we're paying $5 a gallon regularly for gasoline right now. There's some places where it's $6, and people are really experiencing it, this inflation piece, as they go to their stores.
We could go. You went deep fast. So, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Okay, folks, we got a couple other things we're going to talk about. But again, thanks for joining us today. We're going to pick up on everything tomorrow. Scott, great guest today. Folks, stay safe out there, and we will see you tomorrow.